All right, we are joined here for the Transform Dialogues live at Transform, part of the People Strategy Leaders podcast. And my name is Zach.
I'm Amy.
And we're joined by
Kamaria.
Kamaria.
Okay,
Welcome.
you just said your first name. Am I supposed to say my last name too?
No, you're perfect.
Let's see.
My name is Zach Downs.
Right.
We're joined by Kamaria Scott, and we're very lucky to have you here with us. Thanks for joining.
Pleasure to be here.
I've also been a big fan of yours through our journeys together in this whole leadership, talent, people space.
Yes.
And excited to unpack some of these things. So to kind of kick us off, can you share a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's some of the work you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm Kamaria Scott. I'm the founder and CEO of Annetic, a boutique consulting firm that actually improves the performance of people leaders through development, enablement, performance consulting, and change activation.
All right. I love that. Now, when you say the support of people leaders, who do you mean and are you talking about? Are we talking about the executives? Are we talking about, the new leaders? What do you mind?
A great question. So primarily first and middle managers, first line and middle managers, those who are in the trenches, leading teams every day to execute against the company's mission.
I love that space. I feel like that's where I learned some of my biggest lessons as a leader, but not usually because of great things, right? Because it's almost like these roles come with a lot of pressure, right? Like maybe you're a new manager, it's your first time leading a team. That's was the case for me at one point. You are tasked with the engagement and the performance of your team and the health of your team, but then you're also receiving pressure from the top of the organization to execute on certain things. And that can be really tough for the middle manager. What are some of the challenges or barriers that you found a lot of these leaders face?
So I think the goal of any manager is to lead an engaged, healthy, and high-performing team. And I always say that they have to balance relationships and results. And I think that is the hard part, the balancing the relationships and results, because they have a duty of care for their direct reports, people who are reporting to them. So it's a very human aspect of leading teams. But then there's also a duty to the organization to help them achieve their missions. And so you have to be able to think about, when do I have that empathy? When do I make exceptions? But also, how do we stay focused on what we need to do as a business? And I think that is the hardest part for people leaders. One of the things that people, I think, often miss is that in people leadership, it's entirely subjective decision making. Even though you go to training, even though you have manuals, managers really are the center point between strategy, what's set forth by more senior leaders in the organization, and what happens in teams. And they have a lot of decisions to make and a lot of things to weigh in their day-to-day lives.
You used one of my favorite words earlier, which is activation. And I think it's underutilized in the HR space. And we stop oftentimes talking about people at the engagement place, but it really is that activation place we want to get them to. So in the work that you're doing, how are you helping these managers figure out how to drive that activation piece with employees and take people to that next level?
Yes. So there's two things. I think one of them is I craft learning journeys for people leaders where they do have to actually go out and take each skill, each thing out into the world with their team. So they have better conversations, they set better expectations. But also, every manager is a project manager. They may not know it, but they are. So a large part of it is also making sure that they have great project management skills, that they know how to figure out the scope of what people should do and how to navigate stakeholders and how to talk to their team members about the things they should be doing. So balancing the development of how do I have conversations and expectations, how do I successfully manage a project with my team? Those are two things I think are really critical for every people leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about something before this session where oftentimes the decisions that are being made across the organization that directly impact those managers, how they can manage those projects, isn't fully thought through because a lot of leaders in the organization don't understand their role, their day-to-day responsibility. And so you had some really fantastic points I'd like you to come back to about how do we make sure that we recognize how challenging their job is and set them up for success?
Thank you for bringing us back to that, because I do think this is probably one of the most understated conversations, which is no manager ever receives a fully baked plan. We receive concepts of a plan. And with that, a lot of times when they're receiving their sort of marching orders, there might not be a lot of transparency as to how the execution is going to take place. And so managers have to figure it out. And the example that we both talked about was earlier in my career, I used to lead service excellence for a large grocery store chain. And our senior leader said, we're going to walk our guests to the door, same way we'd walk a guest in our home to the front door. And so it's very lofty, right? Brand promise, but someone has to figure out how that comes to life. And that falls on our store directors. Yeah. And so they then have to figure out how to make sense. What does that tactically mean? And if they also have to think about, in this example, if I'm walking someone to the door, I'm walking away from the register. The thing I have to think about is, how does that impact store wait times? How does that affect my front end? Because the front end experience is a key decision factor for customers about how much they enjoy the experience. So then you have that poor sort of director stuck in the middle who is like, I got this directive from the corporate office that says, this is our new brand promise. I have to figure out how to get my team to activate against it, but I also have to make sure that it doesn't impact the store performance as well. And that can be a difficult place for them to put in. So, what I would say is that for organizations, it's really important to have internal support or to have a role that says, if we've asked managers to activate something, we absolutely have to make sure that there's alignment between, be it senior leaders or HR and operations, but also that there's support for them and how they bring those things to life, because it's not quite clear.
I'd love to get to what organizations can do better so that leaders don't have to figure that out on their own. But before we get to that topic, let's start what are the skills that leaders maybe should prioritize in their own development, if that's the environment that they're working in, or what it means or takes to be a leader in today's world of work, right? On one end, you already talked about yes, project management, that's going to be critical. I kind of heard critical thinking, creative, strategic skills.
Yes.
If I need to have this experience of walking someone out of my home in the front end of my store,
Yeah.
I had to have some critical thinking skills to unpack that myself. So what are the biggest skills that you see leaders needing to work on today?
So specifically, I use a model that kind of breaks it down into three things. I first say there's foundations that you have to have. You have to have certain building blocks. You have to first, as a people leader, know yourself and know your team. And so that ability to just sort of have insight about people is really, really important. Then you have to be able to share your vision, communicate clearly, and growth. You have to be able to lead change, give feedback, all of those basic things. And I think those for me are foundations. But then I think managers have to also be coaches. People leaders have to be coaches. And that's where you're not necessarily telling people what to do, but you have to be able to coach through performance. You have to be able to sort of look at a goal, an objective, a task. You have to be able to analyze, why is this person not able to do it? And what do I do about it? How do I help them grow? So you have to think about the leader as a coach. And then you have to be a leader as a strategist. And that's where that strategic thinking, that problem solving and decision making, that sort of networking across organizations, all of those things come into play. So there's kind of the skill of do I know myself? Do I know my team? There's then, do I know how to coach performance out of people? And then there's, do I know how to align my team to what the organization's doing? And do I know how to strategically problem solve what's been asked of me?
Okay, so now that we have the skill sets defined, what can organizations do better to support their leaders, right? In some ways, a lot of times the person gets hired because they're a great individual contributor. And they're like, all right, now go lead the team. Keep doing what you're doing, but for 8 other people, right? And that seems to be where they're left in many cases. So if I'm an organization, I'm a CPO or a CEO, and I really want to create this environment or strategy to have the best leaders throughout the organization, what should I be thinking about? Is it a certain type of development program? Is there a certain type of environment I should be creating culturally? What comes to mind in terms of how organizations can better support and develop their leaders?
That question. So I sort of advise that they look at it from a total systemic approach. And so I use a model that I basically call develop, enable, and activate. And so develop is, yes, you do have to have some development and training for your managers because they're moving into a different role. As an individual contributor, I'm only worried about my work and I'm worried about the tactical things. And so it's very important that they do get development on those basic foundation skills that I mentioned. But it's not necessarily just that they get training. It's that they get quality training that allows them to develop over time. So we have all come from that environment many years ago where we go to training for, 2 days. We have this big binder that would stay in the trunk of our car. No one would look at it after class. But it's really more important to think about how we can take them on a longitudinal journey, let them sort of try out skills and they can get sort of coaching and feedback on how they're doing. It's also important that there's an established view of what good looks like in an organization. And so really taking a scientific view of what are your employee engagement surveys saying? Are you talking to your leaders about what it takes to execute the organization so you can pin down what good looks like? And then develop against that. I think it's also important for organizations to think about having internal people leader communities so that they can learn from each other what's going well, what's not going well, what have you tried. Again, as I said earlier, subjective decision-making is a lot of people leading. So even though you have training, all that's doing is preparing you for the decisions. But when the decisions come, you then want to say, well, how are you doing? What did you try? And that's really important. The second thing I think an organization needs to do is to actively think about challenges that face people leaders and why they're not doing the thing. So I always say people come to me, they go, Kamaria, they won't do the thing. And the thing could be poor performance appraisals. It could be they won't manage out, their low performers, something of that nature. Thinking about the gap in performance and why that might exist. So I use a model that I call the will, the skill, and the way. And that can mean you've asked them to do something that really they can't figure out why they should do it other than HR said so, right? But it also could be there's a self-defeating outcome for that person, meaning if I tell them, I need you to manage out your low performer, but I also say, but you probably won't be able to fill that requisition. They're going to probably not do what I ask, right? So there's a very motivational aspect to it. Then there is whether or not we have given them good training. And there can also be, have we actually built the systems and processes that support what we want to do? So internally, we'll say they won't make the right decision. And I might ask, well, can you show me the policy? And there is no policy. Or they go to push that button and the button doesn't work. So it's really important to do an internal audit to just make sure that anything that you're asking them to do is actually fully supported by internal processes and systems so that they're not having to figure it out and go on a scavenger hunt for whatever it is they need to do those jobs.
I love that. That sounds like, just kind of a very holistic space to thrive as a leader, right? Like not only having the tools and the investment in my development, I also have the community, the peers to go on this journey with. But then now the organization also has a process and a system to kind of reinforce and support it. Like I'm not competing against certain priorities or ways of working to be this leader that I need to be.
Yes. Because I think what I often see, and there was an image on LinkedIn one day of like this manager kind of holding an umbrella and, her team was underneath the umbrella and they had all like these words like, like chaos, disorganization, politics. And it was like she was shielding her team. And, people are like applauding her as like this manager who's like protecting her team. And my thought was, well, why should a manager have to protect their team from the organization? Like my role should not be to come to work and sort of fight against the system and win at all odds. And that kind of has been the approach that we've taken to manager development and manager performance for many years. It's like they have such an incredible role, but we're also like, and good luck with that against everything else. And so one of the reasons why, I very much champion manager enablement is because if your managers are struggling, it is a symptom of what's happening in your organization. If I've got to shield my team against chaos, the manager has to shield their team against chaos. That means your organization is chaotic.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we were talking about earlier too, about there's a reason why people behave a certain way, right?
Absolutely.
And there's typically an environment and experience that reinforces a certain behavior. So if you have managers that are behaving a certain way, it's typically because there's a environment reinforcing this. And that environment is your organization, right? Your systems. Yeah.
So your system is producing manager behavior that is undesirable. It is one thing to look at them internally and say, maybe there's something within eating or something within Zach that we need to develop out of. And that is the purpose of development.
Yeah.
But if there are things happening around the people leader that's causing their behavior, that's not within their control. That's an organizational issue. And so I always say, training is like sending managers through a car wash. You get them all nice and shiny, but then you dip them back into the same dirty water and you wonder why you see the same behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So a question I love to ask for organizations is, what are you compensating them for? And what I mean by that is, if you are compensating them purely on results, but you're hoping they're going to be better people leaders, that's counterintuitive. If nothing in your systems measure your quality as a people leader, there's no indicator how you're leading your team, then really I'm compensated to get this goal across the line however I have to. And you see that a lot with sales leaders who won't stop selling because they're still compensated as if they were sellers. So these are things I think organizations should be thinking about. Like, are we creating what we actually don't want to have in our people leaders?
So smart.
Okay, so as we kind of start to bring this home, we're obviously at Transform, which has this view on the changing world of work, the change on people strategy, the future of people and people tech, all these different things. I'd love to ask you to kind of give your perspective on like, what's like a bold, big challenge or strategy you are seeing or you are predicting that organizations should think about or be on top of to stay ahead of the curve? Like, what is something you're kind of noticing?
I see a lot of Gen Zs deciding they do not want to be people leaders. They are saying, thank you, but no. I would like to be an individual contributor because it looks terrible over there. And you still need people leaders. There may be a time when the robots take over, but we're not there yet. So in the meantime, it's really important to think about the role that we're casting people into and how critical that role is and how maybe undesirable we've made it, that younger generations are looking at it and saying, I'd actually not like to take on that role.